And for more insight on rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula, we're joined now by Stephen Haggard, professor, consultant, and co-author of some books on the DPRK. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Elaine. Happy to be here.
You know, these two sides have been in this position many times before. Is there anything to indicate that this time is more dangerous than just a war of words?
I think this incident is a little bit different because the DMZ itself has actually been fairly quiet. There was one shooting incident involving the sending of balloons by groups in South Korea across the border, but most of the action has been offshore along what's called the northern limit line. So I think moving these kind of provocations on shore is a break from past practice.
Do you think that DPRK leader Kim Jong-un is the unknown factor here?
Well, of course, there is a question of whether all of this is really about a domestic audience. But my interpretation is there might have been a miscalculation. The initial incident, as your reporter noted, occurred on August 4th, the setting of these landmines. But on top of that, the U.S. and the ROK have just started joint military exercises on August 17th. And it was really after the start of those exercises that things appeared to escalate. And I suspect that the leadership in Pyongyang might have gotten a little nervous about the exercises.
So what do you make of this deadline, the Saturday deadline to stop these broadcasts? This deadline was set by the DPRK. South Korea says it will not observe that deadline. So where do they go from here?
Well, the North Koreans frequently issue these kinds of statements, so it's always very difficult to know whether any given deadline or any given threat is serious, and that's actually part of the problem. But I think it's appropriate for the South Koreans to ignore this. But we should also expect that the North Koreans might respond with some low-level provocation, shooting in the DMZ, going after the loudspeakers, maybe something on the northern limit line. I don't think the North Koreans want to see this escalate, but now that Kim Jong-un himself has said that this deadline is set, I suspect we're going to see some action on the part of the North Koreans.
So how do you see the next 48 hours playing out? Do you imagine a scenario, a tipping point where something could escalate? Because we understand from our reporters on the ground on both sides that life is actually pretty normal on the streets there for residents.
Well, I don't expect a general war, obviously, but the thing that we worry about is miscalculation on the part of the North Koreans, because the deterrent after the sinking of the Chonan and the shelling of Yongpyongdo has really been toughened up on the U.S. ROK side. So I think what's going on is that the South Korean government has actually been fairly restrained so far. It's limited retaliation to specific strikes on the part of the North Koreans. And what's going on in the background, I'm sure, is some communication from China and the U.S. Trying to keep this thing from escalating. The U.S. has been relatively restrained. The Chinese communication is that both sides should keep calm, but I suspect that Beijing has put in a call to Pyongyang as well.
All right, Stephen Haggard, thank you so much for your insight from San Diego, California.
My pleasure.